Very early yesterday morning, my father put into the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry, which is just above the Grand Canyon. For 16 days, he will be as off the grid as someone can be in the continental U.S., rafting with 20-something strangers on a guided trip through the Grand Canyon. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon, to be clear. For those wondering, my father is in his late 80s. So obviously we are very excited for him, but it was a little weird when I left him just last Monday at the airport, hugged him before I got on my plane and said, "Be careful." Because he's never done this before, and it is a grand and great adventure, to be sure, but there's a lot that feels unknown to me. That was even more true when John Wesley Powell made the very first recorded journey through the canyon on the river in 1869. When he started that trip, he wrote in his journal, "We have an unknown distance yet to run, an unknown river to explore." And he called that journey Down the Great Unknown. If you'd like to know more about that, by the way, there's a great book called precisely Down the Great Unknown that I recommend. Sometimes we go into uncharted waters and unknown experiences on purpose, to take up an adventure, to explore and discover something for ourselves. Sometimes we take on challenges, determined to try something new, to explore and to explore new things and to stretch ourselves. Sometimes those are things like getting married or starting school. And sometimes they're a physical challenge, like taking a rafting trip into a place you've never been before, and that's different from any other place on earth. But sometimes life puts us in places we didn't want and hadn't intended to be. There are times that we find ourselves in new and unmapped locations, starting a journey we would just as soon prefer not to launch. And it's that second scenario where the disciples find themselves in the text we've heard this morning from the end of the Gospel of John. They are really unsure what's next. They have no idea what path they're supposed to go on, because it's not one that's been traveled before. Certainly not by them. They had been following Jesus. And even though Jesus has appeared to them twice at this point, on the day of resurrection, they are still very unclear about where they are and what's next and where they're supposed to be headed. And so in their uncertainty, Simon Peter says, "Let's go fishing. Not really sure what else to do. I know how to fish. Let's do that." I'm not sure if it's to keep busy or just to do something familiar, or maybe he's just hungry. If the first part of the text we've heard this morning sounds familiar, that's because the miraculous catch of fish also appears in Matthew's gospel, though in an entirely different context. It's in the 5th chapter of Matthew, part of Jesus' earthly ministry in the Good News according to Matthew. But we start this encounter with the risen Christ, with this miraculous catch of fish, something that was so unexpected and such a massive catch of fish, they almost weren't sure what to do with it. And then they get distracted from the fish by the fact that the risen Christ is now appearing before them for the third time. After all of the events of Holy Week, and the excitement, but confusion and uncertainty and dismay even of Easter, perhaps on this third occasion of an experience of the risen Christ, the disciples hoped, maybe this means we can go back to the way things were. Because that had to sound appealing. That had to sound good. Let's just go back to doing the things the way we did them. We know what that's like. It's comfortable. I liked it. I liked it well enough. Maybe I didn't always love sometimes trudging around, but maybe we could return to a place that was familiar and known and skip the whole uncharted territory journey. How long do we think it took Peter to figure out that wasn't going to be the case? How long before he twigged to the fact that Jesus wasn't showing up to return them to what they had known, but was giving him instructions for an entirely new venture? Jesus is giving Peter direction for who Peter will be becoming and what Peter will be building. This will not be a reboot, but something unknown, uncharted, undone before. I know that's not always my favorite thing. There's a reason I'm not on the trip with my father. So perhaps it takes Peter a hot minute. In part because he was busy having his feelings hurt. He's asked 3 times by Jesus, "Do you love me?" And by the 3rd time, he's really kind of bent out of shape about it. "Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you. Of course I love you." "Do you love me?" "Absolutely, I love you. I love you." "Do you love me?" I love you. This threefold inquiry mirrors Peter's threefold denial of Jesus while Jesus was being interrogated. So on the night before Jesus died, he is arrested and taken before the leaders and the chief priests, and a lot of people are gathering in the courtyard, talking and gossiping about what's happened and who this guy is and what's going to happen to him and what they are doing and who was with him. And Peter's kind of there with the crowd, standing a little to the outside, and 3 times he's asked by strangers, "Aren't you with that guy?" And 3 times he says, "Not me. I don't know him. I'm not with that weirdo." So 3 times, Jesus gives him an opportunity to redeem his denials with the affirmation that he loves Jesus. Because Peter had indeed failed in that moment. But with Christ, that's never the end of the story. We too will more than once fail Christ in a moment, but the promise for us also is that's never the end of the story. And so Peter, having failed Jesus, is invited to redeem himself with these affirmations of love and entrusted with a new enterprise. This new expression that is just barely beginning of what it means to follow Jesus, of what it means to live faithfully and fully as a disciple. That's only barely being incubated on that beach, on that shore, with all those fish. It's only just now coming into being, even while the disciples hoped maybe they could go back, they are beginning to see that they will be asked to do something entirely new. It's really hard to let go of what was sometimes. To recognize that a Rubicon has been passed. To let go of a relationship. To realize a marriage has ended, or a friendship. To realize you're not going to get into grad school, or the job you so desperately wanted, or the place you thought you'd always work. It's really hard to let go sometimes of what was. But we do pass Rubicons more than once in our lives. I actually wondered the other day, because I keep using that expression in reference to all the alerts I get on my phone from the New York Times. Oh, we've passed a Rubicon. Some Supreme Court decision or executive order or whatever, right? These unthinkable, unimaginable, before now moments, these laws and rules and events and crimes, this rejection of norms about the rule of law. I keep thinking, oh, there's no going back from that. How many Rubicons can we possibly pass? So many moments seem to signal something irreversible. That tell us that what has been before is irretrievable. It's painful. But there is a part of me that is, and I'm going to be honest with you here, like this is just a glimmer of barely what's happening. But there is a seed planted in me, a thought, the idea that maybe that's a gift. If we cannot go back, that means we can only create something new. In much the same way that the disciples would have had to do. In our society, in our common public life, in our institutions and our norms, something has been altered. And we can waste a lot of energy thinking about how to get it all back, or we can expend our energy and imagination and resources on imagining what we could create together, much like the disciples had to do. So back to breakfast on the beach. What they have to begin to imagine together is what will be the cornerstone of what they build. And much like the denial and the affirmation of love, that is repeated in this text 3 times as well. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. In the Greek, these are actually slightly different words with similar meanings, much like in the English, lambs and sheep are different words referencing, right, the same situation. And feeding and tending are slightly different ways of expressing nurture and care. And one of the theories about the reason that we get these nuanced and slightly altered instructions is that Peter was getting more exasperated and Jesus is kind of ribbing him a little. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. This is what will define what the disciples and we are called to become and build together. Tender, nurturing, love, care, and concern. A community where people are cared for, where people nurture one another, support one another. And this is what ought to delineate the space you and I are creating when we are together. This is what it should feel like and look like and be like when church people hang out, worship, learn, or even eat together. This is how we should care for one another. And this is what you and I are called to be building right here in this place on John Street as the people called Methodists. Now, yes, you and I are living through this really challenging moment when much is being destroyed and we don't have much of an opportunity yet to rebuild or to recreate laws and norms and institutions in our common public life. But nobody gets to tell us what we get to be like in here. That is entirely up to us, up to you, up to me. If you look around this room, you see the people who you have the opportunity to co-create something with. And the only question then becomes, what are you willing to do to make it happen? There is no executive order, no court decision, no newspaper article, no talking head on a TV show who gets to determine who you and I are as a community and as people who love and follow Jesus. Behaviors only exist in environments that support them. So what will we support here together? And how will we support and nurture and care for and affirm one another and everybody who walks into our doors? How will we love one another and all the people out there who are hurting and in need? We don't know exactly what the church is going to be becoming in the time in which we live. Not this little, congregation in this little spot or the worldwide church. There's so much that is unknown. We've not lived through this moment before, you and I. Other people have lived through equally challenging moments, and there's much to learn from them. But this moment, our moment, this opportunity, our opportunity, we don't know what's next. What I do know is we get to decide who and how we are going to be. We're not always going to get it right. This is guaranteed. We're going to deny Jesus. We're going to mess it up. But we'll always be invited to redeem ourselves, to get it right, to try again, and to be a part of what's being built. Much like the television character David Rose, I know my mother more than once in my lifetime, perhaps even as recently as when I saw her last week, has had to ask me multiple times to do something. When I was a kid, it was like pick up your shoes. Have you done your homework? Make your bed. And I really do feel like the first and second times there was probably some patience in that request, but I feel like the third time was the Rubicon, right? Like the third time was when there was no turning back. Something shifted in her voice. 3 times seems to be the space where we really mean it. Perhaps that's also why Jesus invites Peter to affirm his love for him 3 times. We often need to hear things more than once, and I suspect we often need to say things more than once. And what could be better to say early and often, I love you? May that be a part of what we are doing, crafting, building together. Where love is experienced and spoken, where we have a sense of community, of welcome, and a belief that even as we go down the great unknown, we do it together, not alone. And so anything is possible here. No matter what's happening outside, anything is possible in this community. So let's get to it, because Jesus has already asked us thrice. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.